In the world of deep-sea salvage, there is a hierarchy of difficulty. There's the crushing pressure of the abyss, the bone-chilling cold of the Arctic, and then there is the river plate. Hey, the water isn't blue. It's a thick, liquid soup of silt and sediment where visibility is absolute zero. Buried 10 meters deep in this river mud lies a 12,000-ton ghost, the Admiral Graf Spee. For 70 years, she was a graveyard of unsolvable engineering problems. Experts claimed the hydraulic suction of the mud would never let her go, and that the hull was far too brittle to survive a recovery. Yet, in 2004, a team of world-class divers and engineers proved them wrong. They defeated the river and the physics of the mud, demonstrating that with enough breakout force, the Graf Spee could be raised. But as the first massive bronze artifacts began to break the surface, they realized they had a plan for the mud and a plan for the corroded steel. But they had no plan for what happens when you pull a 700-pound bronze swastika out of a watery grave. This was a salvage operation that succeeded in every way that mattered to science, only to fail in every way that mattered to history. To understand why the salvage mattered, you have to understand the ship itself. The Admiral Graf Spee was a pocket battleship, a Deutschland-class cruiser designed to circumvent the Treaty of Versailles by being faster than anything stronger and stronger than anything faster. At the outbreak of World War II, she was the terror of the South Atlantic, sinking 9 Allied merchant ships while her captain, Hans Langsdorff, famously ensured not a single merchant sailor was killed. By December 1939, however, the British Royal Navy cornered her. Following the Battle of the River Plate, Langsdorff found his ship trapped in the neutral port of Montevideo. Believing a massive British fleet awaited him just outside the harbor, a brilliant piece of British misinformation, Langsdorff made a choice to preserve the ship's secrets. He sailed her into the estuary, evacuated the crew, and scuttled her. The ship didn't sink into the deep ocean. She settled into just 25 feet of water. But the river plate is a predator of sediment. Within months, the massive weight caused the ship to sink deep into the soft, treacherous silt. For decades, she wasn't just a shipwreck. She was a buried mountain of German steel. In 2004, a private salvage team led by Hector Beto decided to attempt the impossible, recovering the ship piece by piece. The central engineering challenge was the breakout force required to overcome the vacuum seal created by 60 years of silt. When a vessel sits in mud for that long, the pressure holding it down is immense. To lift even a small section, the team had to fight both the weight of the metal and the atmospheric pressure of the riverbed. This was zero-vis diving, where divers worked entirely by touch, using high-pressure water jets to blast away mud that would resettle almost as quickly as it was cleared. Skeptics argued the team would spend millions only to recover scrap, but the project gained sudden, undeniable legitimacy in February 2004. The team cleared the mud from the ship's primary gunnery rangefinder, a 27-ton precision instrument. As the crane went taut, the river fought back until the suction finally popped. The rangefinder broke the surface, a triumph of engineering that proved the Graf Spee could be brought back to the light. The success of the rangefinder changed the narrative entirely. It was no longer a question of technical capability, but of timeline. The world watched as this massive piece of history was cleaned and put on display in the port of Montevideo, becoming an overnight tourist sensation. Investors were satisfied, and historians were thrilled by the preservation of such advanced 1930s optics. With the wind at their back, the salvage team set their sights on the next target, the stern of the ship. They wanted a centerpiece, an iconic piece of ornamentation that would define the recovery. They targeted the great eagle that adorned the ship's aft. They believed they were bringing up a trophy of a bygone era, a piece of art that would fund the rest of the salvage. They didn't realize that in the dark, silty depths of the River Plate, they were about to unearth an international crisis that no amount of engineering could solve. In early 2006, the engineering team returned to the site with a massive crane barge and a renewed sense of confidence. The target was a specific coordinates at the ship's stern where the bronze ornamental eagle was known to be bolted. Unlike the rangefinder, which was a piece of functional machinery, the eagle was a statement of national identity. It was a massive casting, weighing nearly 800 pounds with a wingspan of 9 feet. Because it was made of high-quality bronze, the river's corrosive salts had been kinder to it than the steel hull. For days, divers worked in the blinding silt, using hydraulic shears to cut through the massive steel bolts that had held the emblem to the ship for 6 to 7 years. The engineering was precise. The team used a specialized cradle to ensure the bronze wouldn't warp or snap under the tension of the lift. They were treating it like a priceless Greco-Roman statue, unaware that the moment it left the mud, its value would shift from archaeological to radioactive. The moment of the breakout was captured on film, a sequence that should have been the highlight of the Salvage documentary. As the winch cable groaned under the tension, a dark, feathered shape began to emerge from the murky brown water of the river plate. At first, it was just a silhouette, a majestic, classical bird of prey. But as the crane hoisted it higher, the water drained away to reveal what the eagle was clutching in its talons, a massive, unmistakable swastika ringed by an oak leaf wreath. The transition was instantaneous. On the barge, cheers from the crew were quickly replaced by a heavy, uncomfortable silence. In the 1930s, this was a symbol of German engineering and naval pride. In 2006, it was a lightning rod for the darkest chapters of human history. The team had successfully solved the physics of the lift, but they had inadvertently triggered a political chain reaction that would eventually swallow the entire project. The news of the recovery hit the international wire services like a bomb. Within hours, the image of the dripping, mud-stained eagle was on every major news network in the world. What had been a niche maritime salvage story was now a global controversy. The Uruguayan government, which had initially supported the project for its tourism and historical value, suddenly found itself in an impossible position. Germany immediately intervened, filing formal diplomatic protests. The German Foreign Office issued a stern warning. They did not want the artifact sold on the private market where it could become an object of pilgrimage for neo-Nazi groups. They argued that the Graf Spee was a war grave, and while the eagle was an ornament rather than a tomb, its symbolic weight was too dangerous to be treated as a commercial asset. The salvage team, which had spent millions of dollars on the operation with the expectation of selling recovered items to museums or private collectors to recoup their costs, was suddenly told they could not move, sell, or even display the piece. The engineering success had created a toxic artifact. Under pressure from the German government and Jewish advocacy groups like the Simon Wiesenthal Center, a Uruguayan court issued an injunction. The eagle was moved to a high-security naval warehouse under military guard. The legal battle that followed was as complex as the salvage itself. The salvors argued that they had a contract that entitled them to 50% of the proceeds of any recovered items. The government argued that the sensitivity of the item overrode the commercial contract. While the lawyers argued, the salvage operation for the rest of the ship, the hull, the massive 11-inch turrets, and the engines, ground to a complete halt. Investors, seeing the political nightmare and the mounting legal fees, began to pull their funding. The specialized equipment was returned, and the barge left the river plate. The engineering team had proven they could raise the ship, but the eagle had ensured they never would. The legal stalemate over the eagle transformed a groundbreaking archaeological mission into a decade-long cautionary tale. For years, the artifact remained hidden under a heavy tarpaulin in a warehouse belonging to the Uruguayan Navy, guarded by soldiers and shrouded in secrecy. The salvage team, led by a frustrated Hector Beto, watched as their multimillion-dollar investment evaporated. The tragic irony was that the more successful they were at preserving the artifact, the more radioactive it became. Because the eagle was in such pristine condition, it was more than a relic. It was a potent, functioning symbol. Every time the government considered putting it in a museum, international pressure forced them to reconsider. The fear was that any public display would inevitably become a shrine for extremist groups. Yet any attempt to destroy it was met with outcries from historians who argued that you cannot erase the physical evidence of history, no matter how painful. As the years passed, the legal battle reached the Uruguayan Supreme Court. In a landmark ruling, the court eventually decreed that the eagle belonged to the state, but that the salvage team was still entitled to their 50% share of its value. This created a secondary engineering problem. How do you value an object that is legally prohibited from being sold? Estimates range from $5 million to over $50 million, but with the German government threatening further diplomatic sanctions if the piece went to auction, the valuation was purely theoretical. In 2023, the Uruguayan president proposed a radical solution, melting the 700-pound bronze eagle down and recasting it into a dove of peace. The backlash was immediate and global. Historians and the public alike argued that destroying the artifact was a form of cultural amnesia. Within days, the government backed down, and the eagle was returned to its crate, its fate still undecided. While the eagle sits in a dark warehouse, the Admiral Graf Spee itself remains in the river, and time is doing what the salvage team wasn't allowed to finish. The river plate is a highly corrosive environment. The combination of salt water and heavy industrial runoff from Montevideo's harbor is slowly eating away at the Krupp steel hull. Every year that the legal battle over the eagle continues, the ship sinks deeper into the silt, and the structural integrity of the remaining sections, including the massive gun turrets, deteriorates. The engineering window that was pried open in 2004 has effectively slammed shut. The suction of the mud has reclaimed the sections that were cleared by water jets, and the cost to mobilize a second salvage attempt is now prohibitively high. The ship is no longer a candidate for recovery. It is a dissolving wreck. The story of the Graf Spee's eagle serves as a haunting reminder that in the world of history and salvage, technical capability is only half the battle. The team solved the mud suction, they solved the zero visibility diving, and they solved the breakout force of 27-ton instruments. They proved that human ingenuity could conquer the physical challenges of the Rio de la Plata. But they were defeated by a force more powerful than the river, the enduring power of a symbol. Today, the rangefinder remains on a lonely pier in the port of Montevideo, a rusting monument to a project that almost changed maritime history. A few miles away, the eagle remains locked in the dark, and a few miles into the estuary, the Graf Spee continues its slow, final descent into the mud, a victim of the fact that some parts of history are simply too heavy to lift. The technical failure of the Graf Spee salvage cannot be understood without a granular look at the Rio de la Plata itself. It is not an ocean. It is an estuary where the Parana and Uruguay rivers meet the Atlantic. This creates a salt wedge effect, a layer of dense seawater moving under a layer of fresh water. For a diver, this creates a thermocline and a halocline that distorts light and creates treacherous, shifting currents. The visibility isn't just low, it is non-existent. Divers described it as swimming in chocolate milk. Every movement of a flipper stays up a cloud of fine, volcanic origin silt that takes hours to settle. To overcome this, the salvage team had to innovate. They used underwater suction dredges, essentially giant vacuum cleaners that could move hundreds of cubic meters of silt per hour. But the river fought back. The hole they dug during the day would often be filled back in by the tides at night. The engineering cost wasn't just in the equipment, but in the constant, repetitive labor of reclearing the same square meter of hull over and over again. This was the invisible tax on the project. When the rangefinder was finally cleared, it wasn't just lifted, it was liberated from a tomb that was actively trying to reclaim it. The rangefinder, with its 27-meter-long optical base, was a masterpiece of Zeiss engineering. Its recovery proved that the silt had actually acted as a preservative, shielding the metal from the oxygen-rich surface water that would have otherwise rusted it to nothingness. This realization, that the ship was essentially a perfectly preserved time capsule, is what made the subsequent failure so tragic. When the focus shifted to the stern and the eagle, the engineering complexity increased. The eagle wasn't just sitting on the deck. It was part of the ship's structure, bolted into the armored skin of the vessel. The divers had to use hydraulic jaws of life and specialized underwater torches to cut through the mounting points. This had to be done entirely by feel. A diver would place their hands on the cold bronze, identifying the bolts by the shape of the corroded heads, and then guide the cutting tools into place. There was a constant risk of the eagle snapping off and crushing a diver into the mud if the tension wasn't perfectly balanced. The breakout force calculation for the eagle was a nightmare. The bronze surface area created a significant suction footprint. If the crane pulled too hard, the bronze might crack. If it pulled too soft, the river would never let go. The team utilized a series of lifting bags, inflatable underwater balloons, to provide a constant upward pressure, supplemented by the crane's winch. It was a slow-motion tug-of-war. 4 hours. The gauges on the barge showed the tension rising. 5 tons, 10 tons, 20 tons. Then, the sensors recorded a sudden drop in resistance. The mud had let go. As the Eagle broke the surface, the physical problem was solved, but the narrative problem began. The bronze was so well preserved that the swastika was still sharp, its edges defined, the oak leaves of the wreath visible even through the slime. The salvage team had expected a relic, something softened by time. What they got was a symbol as sharp and aggressive as the day it was cast. This is where the data becomes crucial for the audience. The German government's claim on the ship was based on the succession of state principle. Even though the Third Reich had collapsed, the Federal Republic of Germany was legally its successor and therefore held the sovereign immunity rights to all former naval vessels. However, Uruguay argued that because the ship was scuttled in their territorial waters and posed a hazard to navigation, they had the right to authorize its removal. This legal friction created a vacuum. The salvage team was caught in the middle. They had a permit from Uruguay to dig, but they were being threatened by Germany for disturbing what was technically German territory. To the older US guys watching this, the most relatable tragedy is the financial one. This wasn't a government-funded mission. It was a private venture. Hector Beidou and his partners had staked their reputations and millions of dollars on the idea that the Graf Spee was a gold mine of history. In the world of high-stakes salvage, you usually recoup your costs by selling the non-essential artifacts to fund the recovery of the essential ones. The Eagle was supposed to be the gold ticket. A museum in the United States or a private collector would have easily paid $10 million or more for a piece of this caliber. That money would have funded the recovery of the 11-inch guns, the engines, and perhaps even a section of the hull for a permanent museum in Montevideo. But the moment the German government and the Simon Wiesenthal Center stepped in, the Eagle's market value dropped to zero. It became illegal to sell, illegal to display, and too expensive to store. The toxic artifact didn't just stop the crane, it stopped the bank transfers. The salvage team was left with a 700-pound piece of bronze that they couldn't sell, and a massive debt they couldn't pay. The current state of the Graf Spee is the final chapter of this tragedy. Since the operation was halted, the ship has suffered more damage than it did in the previous 60 years. When the salvage team cleared the silt from sections of the ship, they exposed the metal to the oxygenated currents of the river. Without the protective blanket of mud, the electrochemical corrosion, galvanic corrosion, accelerated. The river water acts as an electrolyte, and the different metals of the ship, the steel hull, the bronze propellers, the armored plating, act like a giant battery, slowly eating themselves away. The ship is now structurally failing. Recent sonar scans suggest that the internal decks have begun to pancake. The massive turrets, each weighing hundreds of tons, are starting to tear through the weakened hull and settle into the riverbed. In another 20 years, there will be nothing left to save. The engineering triumph of 2004 was a once-in-a-generation window that has now closed. The 2023 proposal by President Louis Lecalpu to melt the Eagle into a dove of peace was the final insult to the engineering team. To an engineer or a historian, destroying the artifact is the ultimate failure. It is the admission that we are not mature enough to handle our own history. The proposal was eventually defeated not by the salvage team, but by a global outcry of people who realize that the Eagle, swastika and all, is a vital piece of the data of humanity. So, the Eagle remains in a crate. The rangefinder remains on a PU, ignored by passers-by. And the Admiral Graf Spee remains in the mud, dissolving into the silt of the river plate. The salvage operation proved that we have the technology to reach into the past and pull it into the light. But it also proved that we are often unprepared for what the light reveals. The mud of the river plate was a better protector of the Graf Spee than the laws of man. In the end, the engineering succeeded, but the politics failed, leaving us with a ship that is disappearing and a symbol that won't go away.